In previous programs, we've discussed dreams and investigated their history in the ancient Near East, in ancient Greece and Rome, and in our Christian tradition. However, I've not attempted to define what a dream is. I wanted to wait until we had time to explore various aspects of dreams and dreaming, including doubt and dreams, before embarking upon the dicey matter of their definition. If dreams were creatures, then a dream would be a nocturnal animal that comes out when we sleep. However, there's no observational definition of dreams that can come close to what we all know a dream to be. This is because nobody, including the dreamer, can know a dream while dreaming it or while watching a dreamer dream. Our very conception of knowledge entails consciousness, and that's precisely what we do not have when we dream. But can there not be forms of knowledge that we acquire outside of whatever we might define as consciousness? This is a question to which we will return, and one that we touched upon when we spoke of the sixth of the unicorn tapestries in the Musée de Cluny in Paris. Now, what about physiological definitions of dreams? Neurophysiologists who study sleep and dreaming have identified a particular phase of sleep which they've associated with dreaming. This is what is known as REM sleep, the sleep phase associated with rapid eye movements. Because researchers have correlated dream activity, as picked up in the brain imaging, with rapid eye movements, many tend to see blips on a screen as evidence of dreaming. However, there are two problems with assumptions based on this correlation. First, researchers assume that because the subjects awakened in the REM phase of sleep tended to remember their dreams better, it is further assumed that they were actually dreaming when the researchers saw brain activity and correlated it with rapid eye movements. This may or may not be the case. It may equally well be that the dream was a function of having been awakened. The second objection is more fundamental still. Brain and sleep researchers tend to think that a dream can be defined as they observe it, as brain activity picked up on monitors and as rapid eye movements. Epistemologically, dreams can never be observed directly. Scientists can only focus on what they define to be the manifestations of dream activity. This leaves dreams in the black box. The consciousness of one person can never be a substitute for the lack of consciousness of another. Because the researcher is awake, how can he know at the time what goes on in the sleep of his unconscious subject? Furthermore, what we want is a definition of what we all experience as dreams and dreaming. So how such a definition eludes us becomes rather important. Is there a problem with language? What kinds of conceptual difficulties do we encounter in describing what we are now calling a dream? And what does consciousness have to do with our difficulties in defining a dream? Now, let us now look at what dictionaries tell us about dreams. The Oxford English Dictionary defines a dream as, quote, a series of thoughts, images, sensations, or emotions occurring in the mind during sleep, close the quotes. The definition covers all bases and provides that sort of omnibus approach that may be useful for linguists wanting not to make a mistake, but leaves the rest of us wondering. What do we know that is not an image, a sensation, a thought, or an emotion? It would seem that dreams conform to all other knowledge except that they come in sleep. They're human knowledge and experience obtained in sleep. What kind of difference does that make? Why? How? Bearing these questions in mind, let's have a look at etymological dictionaries and see what light they might shed. The word dream can be traced in Old English to the mid-13th century. As a verb to dream, it is probably related to the Old Norse drömmer, the Danish drömmer, the Swedish dröm. Some believe it also to be related to the German word Traum. If we look at the etymology of the German word Traum, meaning dream, it is related to the Greek word trauma, meaning wound, something pierced. If we follow the logic suggested by etymology, then, it would appear that dreams can be traumatic and are even associated with psychic wounds, as in nightmares and anxiety dreams. We can also imagine that they pierce our conscious sense of ourselves by opening out onto another world. Now, this should come as no real surprise, as we've seen in the tradition of Asclepius and in the practice of incubation, or healing in dreams, how integral a part in conceptions of sickness and healing dreams were assumed to have, and how they were believed to reach far beyond the world of ordinary daily life. But the Old English word dream also corresponds to the Old Saxon word drom, meaning not only dream, but also joy, gladness, mirth, and music. Not only music, but melody and sound. So it would seem that if we follow out the logic in these etymologies, we come out with antithetical meanings. One line of thought brings us to trauma and injury, the other to joy and music. From our contemporary vantage point, with our focus on the divide between illness and joy, medicine and the arts, it would seem that there is no way of reconciling the two lines of thought. However, if we look closer, it becomes conceivable that in the classical world, notions of sickness enclosed also possibilities for joy and music, and all three concepts indicated a relation to a world beyond. We know that in the incubation sites known in Greek as the abaton, the incubation places where pilgrims slept in order to have curative dreams, were also part of temple complexes that included theaters, and that theater, dance, and music were integral to the practice of incubation. For the ancient Greeks, illness, like theater, dance, and music, provided an opportunity for the connection with the beyond. Furthermore, the celebration of such connections constituted a major interest for the practice of all the arts, the art of healing being only one. Now let's take up dreams, writing, and literacy. If we look at historical records and read up on dream narratives passed down to us, the question of the value dreamed knowledge has blend in with the various historical and archival difficulties in making sense of documents. We have dream texts, for example, from the library of Ashurbanipal in Assyria, but these have been recorded for a variety of reasons, which it's important to note. First, they're intimately linked to history. Second, they're associated with scribes who were paid to glorify their patrons. Third, they depend upon a cultural context distinctly unlike our own, in which dreams had particular meanings, quite possibly obscure to us today, as possible manifestations of the divinity. Today it's difficult to imagine the world of the Greeks, in which incubation could be widely practiced precisely because dreams were experienced to be so difficult to recognize, and because the categories of truth and falsehood rang somewhat differently for them than they do for us today. It seems obvious to add that for the ancient Greeks in temple complexes, what was celebrated was not health as in fitness clubs, but rather life itself. And an integral part of feeling alive was feeling a beyond. Now, here let me speak briefly about the siting of Greek temples. Whereas our churches enclose a sacred space and do so with nave, apse, altar, and so forth, Greek temples were not themselves sacred, nor did they enclose a defined sacred space. Instead, they framed a sacred grove or stream or mountain that could be seen and made sacred by the way in which the temple framed it. Take, for example, the astonishing temple of Segest in northern Sicily. At first, we would assume that the temple would be sited to overlook a vista of mountains and sea, since the breathtaking vista there is easily to be seen from the site itself. But the temple does not bring into focus any particular mountain or view of the sea, and is distinctly off-kilter for those wanting it to enhance the panoramic view. Rather, it faces a sacred grove and gully behind the temple into the mountainside. Instead of being about panoramic views, the temple is about water and sacred groves, and we might add cave cults, those sources of dreams and visions of the beyond. Now let's turn to Freud and a definition of dreams in psychoanalysis. How, you might ask, does Freud's view of dreams fit into all this? The subject of dreams in psychoanalysis is a very large subject, but let me here comment very briefly and incompletely. Freud saw himself in the grand tradition of the Asclepiads, the first physicians who were followers of the god of healing Asclepius. In fact, he identified himself with Asclepius, who often appeared together with his snakes and various members of his family in healing incubation dreams. Freud is the son of a man who declared, quote, "This boy will come to nothing," close the quotes, wanted to disprove his father by becoming famous. What better way for a young psychiatrist to do so than to evoke Asclepius? But Freud could not leave dreams ambiguous. He needed to define them in such a way that he could present dream interpretation to be scientific. Dreams needed to become a body on which he could perform surgery, on which he could demonstrate his technique. But at the same time, he needed dreams to be texts so that he could interpret them in the grand rabbinical tradition in which rabbis could actually make good dreams bad and bad dreams good through the power of their interpretations. However, treating dreams as text to be translated, a bit like Linear B or hieroglyphics, imposed restrictions on the ways in which dreams could then be defined. These restrictions are shared by all modern theories of dream interpretation, which treat dreams as texts. However important Freud's theories of dreams and their relation to the unconscious are, and I think they're extremely important, there were also important omissions. For instance, we know telling dreams changes them. Of course, not telling them can also change them in the sense we can forget them more easily. Each time we tell a dream, it changes, depending on our mood, on the person to whom we tell it, the reasons we choose to do so, or how we feel, and so forth. To assume that a dream can be as stable as a text leads to underestimating the ambiguities of dreaming experience and its dependency on relationships. It leads to a view of dreams as independent of the relation to the teller. This implicitly is the view propagated by all dream books. In his monumental and enormously important book, The Interpretation of Dreams, Freud presents himself as one who knows in what the accuracy of dream interpretation consists, and holds that psychoanalytic theories can readily identify accurate dream interpretations. Now, while this fits with his scientific aspirations, and with assumptions about psychoanalysis as a talking cure in which language can be relied upon, and with his capacity to command attention as one who investigates the mind, it does not fit with a history of dream telling and dream interpretation, in which the power of an interpretation lies in the relation with the interpreter, with the political and social status of the dreamer and the interpreter, with the uses of interpretation in representing history or demonstrating prophecy, and with a cultural context in which the power of dream interpretation is understood. And finally, with respect to definitions of dreams, there's the question of how to discriminate among our terms dream, vision, hypnagogic fantasy, and waking dreams. It seems highly doubtful that these terms of ours had precise equivalents in other languages and in the ancient world. About all we can say is that there was some kind of basic distinction, at least in dream classification, between messenger dreams, healing dreams, often confounded with visions, on the one hand, and ordinary dreams on the other. The first tended to be viewed as true, the second as false. It would appear then that the definition of a dream cannot be clear, since it strains the limits of language and thought. We can be grateful that it does. To assume that a dream can, like a bird, be stuffed and observed seems to me a mistake. We want a definition of a dream that respects its life and gives us the freedom to imagine it. Of course, there may not be any such definition, and if there is, the dream may, like a stuffed bird, be readily interpreted but not alive. In all fairness to Freud, he managed, perhaps better than anyone in the 20th century, to evoke the life of the dream despite the encumbrances of his theories and assumptions. Now, let us turn to the whole question of dream iconography. Another approach to the definition of a dream is through its representation in the visual arts. While I will devote more time in the future to the subject of the iconography of dreams, here I want to illustrate definitions and conceptions of dreams as we find them in a few paintings. Now, in this first painting, in this altogether charming painting of Giotto, one of the series of frescoes found in the Cappella degli Scrovegni in Padua, Giotto depicts Jacob's dream. Painted around 1304-1306, Giotto represents the dream visually, using composition, scale, and imagery. The figure framed and clearly asleep and dreaming is Joachim, or Jacob, dressed in pink and gathered together with voluminous robes in the lower right of the painting. He is framed by what appears to be the entrance to an underground rock dwelling, perhaps an allusion to Chthonian cave cults and their importance for dreams. In the center of the painting are diminutive animals, and on the left are their shepherds. Then, coming out of the sky, feet trailing in indistinction as he swoops down, the angel messenger. We can imagine the cleft in the rock to represent the divide between sleep and wakefulness. Now, in the second painting that we will consider, Constantine's Dream, is one of a series of frescoes on the subject of the history of the True Cross in the Basilica of San Francesco in Arezzo. Constantine won the Battle of Milvian Bridge on the Tiber against Maxentius on October 28, 312. A sign of the cross appeared in his dream the night before the battle. In the dream, a voice declared, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign you shall conquer. The battle is regarded as a turning point in the establishment of Christianity within the Roman Empire. This crucial scene for the history of Christianity is dramatically lit. Inside his tent, the soon-to-be victorious emperor lies asleep. Seated on what appears to be the ledge of a bed, a young servant gazes vacantly, eyes unfocused. The tent tops in the background hint at an army. In the foreground stand two sentries framing the scene. Most impressively, there appears to be a rent in the upper left where a divine presence tears the fabric of ordinary human life. This is the way Piero della Francesca represents the dream, as an opening through which superior powers can emanate. Now, in the next painting, Elsheimer, who lived at the end of the 16th century, depicts a young man who falls asleep beneath a tree. Elsheimer was a German artist working in Rome who lived a short but influential life. The young man is in a mythical landscape, suggested by the contrast between the browns that dominate the foreground and the tree and the blue-greens that dominate the background. Once again, the divide between waking and dreaming worlds is represented. The browns would suggest the world of earthly things, and the blue-green, the world beyond, or the world of the imagination. From a hollow in the tree comes a ladder, and on the ladder hovering is a figure, the dream figure. Now, the next painting is Carpaccio, Ursula's Dream. Now, we see Ursula in bed asleep. The bedposts divide the scene sharply, another reminder of the divide between dreaming and waking. To the right, a messenger figure bathed in light enters the room. The light behind this messenger figure would seem to indicate that she comes from another world. Note how it fans out, stopping at the foot of the bed. The next painting is by Karl Brulhoff, who in the 19th century painted this dream of grandmother and granddaughter. In the center of the picture are clothes piled on top a chair, with the sleeping dreamers on either side. The granddaughter has shed her covers and lies curled up only in a nightie. On the walls hang illustrious ancestors, while overhead swoons a lavender-draped woman, breasts pleasingly visible, whose figure blurs the ancestors. Clearly, she steals the show. Her floating diaphanous figure contrasts with the weighty, detailed figures asleep, although The separation of waking and dreaming that we've seen in earlier paintings is here missing. Here in a second painting of Brülow is another dream scene. You will note that there are two sleeping figures echoed by a sleeping dog, and the chair is festooned with clothes. The dreamed figure is diaphanous and hovers weightless over the bed. Interestingly, it is daylight outside where we can see a tree and possibly the figure of a man dressed in blue. Whether this is a part of the young woman's dream or a dream frame to clarify the imagination inside and the reality outside is deliberately unclear. In this last painting, The Nun's Dream of Brülow's, we see the nun asleep amidst gathered bedclothes. Once again, Brülow blurs the boundary between dreaming and waking by putting an old woman with a shawl and cane at the door and depicting a bell tower outside the window. The dream figures are two, one a young woman tenderly and with childlike wistfulness looking up at a second woman who is perhaps not a woman at all. The second woman has a mustache and a goatee, shades of sexual desire for a man who is not there. Now let us conclude with one of the most very famous of all dream images. This is Fuseli's painting of the nightmare. Fuseli was born in 1741 and died in 1825, so his long life made him a contemporary of, among others, Rembrandt and Vermeer in Holland, Gainsborough in England, Guardi and Canaletto in Italy, and de la Tour Chardin de la Croix en Ingres in France. Now, what do we see in this painting? First, there's a sleeping young woman draped helplessly over what appears to be a bed or couch of some kind. Sitting on her abdomen is a snub-nosed demon looking grotesque and not human, and throwing an ominous shadow on the curtain behind. And from the curtain emerges a wide-eyed horse, presumably the nightmare herself. The horse, a mare, that visits anguished dreamers. The painting depicts helplessness and the anxiety, with the horrifying stare of the nightmare organizing the entire composition. Interestingly, here, there's no division between the representation of waking and dreaming worlds. There's only the prostrate, unconscious woman dreamer and the figures of her nightmare all crowded into one frame. Whereas in earlier paintings, as we've seen, the divide between waking and sleeping was clearly represented. Here, the boundaries blurred. What this suggests is a question to which we will return shortly. Now, we still don't know what a dream is. We've seen that dreams defy definition in important ways. First, we can never know a dream directly as we dream it. We can only remember dreams. So dreaming is a bit like speaking to friends in distant time zones. There's a problem with the here and now. Second, there's nobody else who can know the dream as we know it. In order for the dream to be communicated, it must first be remembered and then told. Therefore, definitions of dreams driven by either behavioral or physiological concerns, for instance, blips on a screen, can never even remotely match the experience we have of dreaming. Third, dreams are not and never can be texts. They are sensual experiences that have nothing to do with writing. Those writing on dreams have plugged into a written tradition, whether Greek, Roman, Christian, or Islamic. Freud is but one example of a major figure for whom dream interpretation is the interpretation of a text. Fourth, with our history of sharp distinctions between religion and superstition, together with the institutionalized skepticism of the Catholic and Protestant churches towards dreams in general, and its history in the tradition of heresy in particular, dreams today often get defined as inconsequential experiences linked to bodily functions. Visions, on the other hand, when had by certified saints or other holy figures, tend to be on the side of the true. Thus, the distinction we make between our categories of dreams and visions pick up on the ancient Greek categories. Visions are true, whereas mere dreams are deceitful and often false. To have thus demoted dreams by using visions to one-up them would seem to manifest our Western penchant for rationalism, and also to smuggle in Christian doubts. Our contemporary distinction between good and bad dreams is therefore strikingly at odds with the ancient distinction between true and false dreams. Finally, what are we to think of the representational divide in paintings of dreams before the middle of the 18th century? The most accessible answer is that dividing dreams from waking did not present the same anxieties as it does after the middle of the 18th century and up to the present day. Might accepting and recognizing the divide paradoxically indicate respect for dreaming experiences and for the imagination? Conversely, might the conflation of dreaming and waking indicate fear of dreams and of the incomprehensible worlds they render? Or is the conflation of a demotion of the status of dreams as evidence of a world beyond that our senses and reason? These then are the questions with which I will leave you. In future programs, we will continue our exploration of dreams and why it's so difficult to define them and their representation in the visual arts. I look forward to seeing you then.